Christmas 2013, new video with the hands-free camera rig. The Coroplast do-it-yourself HRV, heat recovery ventilator. First things I always do, I draw a lot of these things on SketchUp first. Actually, usually by hand, a pencil sketch, of something, and that gets me the basic idea. Then I sit down on the computer for untold numbers of hours, like this redesign of this HRV unit here. It took me about, I don't know, probably 6 hours of constant tweaking and screwing around with. And after that, I print these things out with a program called Big Print. I take the items in SketchUp, like so, and then you calibrate the program to make a life-size printout of your item that you do in SketchUp on regular printer paper out of a regular inkjet printer. So you see this object here is 18 inches long, and this is printed out on 4 sheets of paper. The program Big Print adds these grid lines to your drawing, and I print them all in line style out of SketchUp. I change the style in there so that it saves a lot of ink and stuff like that. So it pretty much looks like something a plotter did. And you'll see there's fine green grid lines all over here. It prints a 1/2 inch overlap, so you're able to slide the pieces over each other and make sure that all of the different areas where the lines cross are all lined up perfectly. Then you know you're set. Before you tape it, you double check your measurement. Right there I put the measurement on the drawing, and there's a couple other options in Big Print for doing that. But along this side, this is like 18 inches, so I just measure, make sure that it's exactly 18 inches. I assembled the multiple pieces of paper correctly. Then I'll usually use Scotch tape on the corners. You can use paper glue too if you want. And then I take clear tape and just go over the seams first. Then I cover the entire drawing, the entire template, if it's good enough that is, with clear tape. So it becomes almost like a poor man's laminated template that you can reuse over and over again. And if the item's really good, you could cut this out of like thin board or something like that, and then you'll have templates to do these kind of things over and over again. So next step after you do that, and it all checks out, you slap a nice straight edge on here, take an X-Acto knife, and trim out everything. Just do a really tight job of cutting this stuff out. Big Print, because it's printing off a computer program, you'll see there's little jagged lines here, and it looks a little blurry because it's like a computer print kind of blown up a little bit, and you just have to kind of deal with that and not worry about it. So if you have a bunch of jaggy lines, you just do the average of it. Just make sure that the object in here works out to your exact size, what you're cutting out. It takes a little bit of skill, but it's just cutting out a pattern. Make sure you've got a nice flat table, which this isn't right now. And so on. Do the whole thing and cut out all these objects in the middle. And a little bit later, you're all done and you're ready to take this thing, put it onto a sheet of Coroplast, and start tracing to transfer the template to your sheet material to cut this out. This is going to be the side of the HRV. These are going to be little windows just kind of done for style on the side here with some plexiglass. And in the center, this is going to be a hatch so that you slide the core into the unit, and there's going to be a door that just mounts over this that you can seal with some silicone and a few screws to leave that closed. But then when it comes time to access it, you can just quickly trim a little bit of the silicone and pop it right off and slide the core out. You could also use weather stripping or something on this, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Okay, next step is got to dice up this 3-foot by 6-foot sheet of Coroplast that I got from Home Depot. I need 2 of these sides and a bunch of other miscellaneous pieces on here. So that's the first sheet. The second sheet, I'm going to split that in roughly half, and there's going to be a number of 6-inch squares all cut out that are going to make the core of the HRV unit. So it's going to take at least half the sheet to do that, if not one row 6 inches more or something like that. So we'll get to that in a minute also. So I'm going to trace these things out on here and dice it up. For cutting big sheets of coral like this, or any other kind of sheet goods, one of these drywall T-squares comes in really handy. You know, because you can do 4-foot cuts on things. And I picked this one up pretty cheaply a number of years ago at Big Lots for like $6. So you got to look around and find those. They sell them at Home Depot too. So I'm just going to line this up on here in one of the parts, and then probably just cut the sheet straight across the ribs. Then I'm going to talk about cutting with the ribs on the coroplast in just a minute. I was going to use a rotary cutter to do this. I'm just going to use a regular utility blade on this. I've heard that you can use Fisker's 45mm rotary cutters to cut this thing, and I'm going to get a different straight edge and stuff like that and go dig out my rotary cutter. It's put away right now, so can't find it. So just going to do it the easier way here. For marking on coroplast, I use these let's see, ultra fine point Sharpie markers. See, they do a nice dark line on here. And permanent markers are one of the only things that easily marks on here. Pencil doesn't really work, and you don't want to use pens or anything like that if you can help it. So try to get yourself a fine point to do this. Cutting coroplast is real difficult with a regular utility knife like this, especially across the ribs. So what you'll want to do is get a metal straight edge, hold it down real good, and cut along here, cutting through about half the ribs first, then go back and do it again very carefully. And you're going to find tons of resistance. Like I said, a rotary cutter, you know, with a round wheel, just rolling it over this like a pizza cutter would do a real good job of cutting through this, I bet. Now I've scored this, I'm ready to cut along the line, so get myself a shorter piece of this, and I'm going to use this thing right here. This is the Coro Claw by Sawtrax Manufacturing. I think it's only one of 2 tools made for cutting coroplast here in the US. I think they got a patent on this thing. So you've got these little guides on the blade right here. There's 2 small sharp notches in there and 2 guides. If you want to cut along one side of the coroplast, like if you want to just score it for bending or whatever, you use the first one. If you want to cut through both sides of the fluting, you put it all the way in. So I've got my mark here. Now I'm going to insert that into one of the flutes and just going to cut right straight down across them. It also helps when you're using this tool if you just turn the tool just slightly like that to lock it inside the rib, or else you'll still get like a little bit of a wavy cut down the rib. If you turn the tool and lock it just slightly and then cut, you'll get a smooth line all the way down here. So let's go over here and do this. And it takes a little bit of pressure, but as you can see, that does a really, really nice job, and it's pretty safe too. Trying to do this and cut along these flutes with a regular utility knife is really difficult, and you can accidentally turn the knife as you're cutting and it'll cut across the ribs. With this tool here, there's no chance of screwing that up and cutting sideways like this. Okay, now it's time to do the tracing and get this thing made. Okay, you can tape down the template to the coroplast, and what you want to do is you want to mainly put the tape on the straight edges of any holes you're going to cut out in here so that you can easily trace the corners smooth and unbroken, and then when you come to the straights you're going to have just, you know, gaps along there where the tape is. Once you peel that tape off, you can just take your straight edge and just fix those up a little bit. So then you'll get a nice clean layout on here. Okay, so start tracing wherever you want, and just hold it down, do a nice tight job, and go around everything. Okay, looks pretty good. I'm just going to finish connecting the lines so I have something for my eyeball to go by, and I'm going to trim all these out using the X-Acto knife. And speaking of X-Actos, even though you can use the thin ones on this, sometimes the larger, heavier duty model is good for cutting the coroplast like this. So try and find one of these. There's many Chinese clones of these laying around and whatnot, and they use the number 2 blades, the nice thick ones. So get yourself a good cutter like this that you can really put some pressure down. And you usually have to make 2 passes. There you have it. Now sometimes you'll want to take the heavier cutter and do all the straights. When you come to the corners, a good technique with an X-Acto like this is to come in here, and you can cut either direction, kind of punch straight down like a sewing machine would, and just kind of go part of the way down the blade and go around the corner. So you can see, it'll get a little rough on occasion, but you can do it. So there you are. And if the edges are a little rough here and there, you can actually take sandpaper to this. If you take 100 grit sandpaper of any kind, put it on a small block, and do a little bit of light sanding in here, you can get all the little leftover stuff off of here, and it smooths the edges pretty good. You could even round the corners if you put sandpaper on a dowel and did it that way. So that's one little tip that does actually work. Okay, there it is. Lots of trouble, lots of struggle, which I edited out so you guys don't have to see this. That's pretty cool. So anyway, got to come back over here and cut another one out, because of course it's just a little bit bigger than that first piece, but we've still got plenty to do this. So I'm going to cut out another one of these for the other side. This is the front side of the HRV, another one on the back, and this is all going to be just boxed in. Okay, now both sides are cut out. We've got our piece, which we're going to reserve for the hatch that goes over the core. And got our 2 sides. Now we're just going to box this all in. And all this is just going to be done by cutting pieces and adding on sides. So there's going to be the rear side here, which is going to be 18 inches, and then each of the individual walls on this thing. The way I'm going to build this is I'm going to start on the bottom and add walls onto this and just build it up like a box all the way around. It's going to be done using hot glue and the hot glue gun. So I'll say another little word about this. I bought this one at Harbor Freight. I think it was about $30, something like that. It's made by Adhesive Technologies, and I've had this a couple of years now. It says Pro 100, so this is like a 100-watt glue gun. It has interchangeable tips on it, and I've got this tip on here, the wide nozzle, which is nice for doing big wide areas like this. And I've been using yellow glue sticks up until now, yellow high-strength ones, which is what I used to put together, things like this for woodworking. It says it's woodworking glue. Now, Adhesive Technologies sells these on Amazon, and I'll put a link to that. They make these full-size multi-temp glue sticks, which supposedly say they can be used in a low-temperature gun and in a high-temperature gun, such as this one. Now, the interesting thing is they say bonds wood, metal, glass, fabric, and foam in 20 seconds. they seem to be a little hotter for some reason. They seem to melt the coroplast a little quicker, so I have to be a little more careful about that. But the bond strength on these is really strong. The guy who sold these things right here, the Coro Claw, I got this from a place called Holiday Coro, where they sell coroplast for like Christmas displays and stuff like that. He recommended these adhesive technologies multi-temp sticks. He said that it says non-yellowing on here. Supposedly they withstand the UV quite a bit, but then again, he's in like Georgia or something like that. He's not out here in New Mexico where every day the sun is just, disintegrating stuff. So, who knows if they'll hold up out here, but I like them because they look a little bit cleaner on this because they're clear, and the bond strength seems to be really high. Like, it's very, very hard to pull this stuff apart. So that's what you want. So going to cut some pieces and get to gluing. So when building a coroplast box, basically, what I do is the sidewalls, I want the ribs running horizontally. The rear wall on this thing, I'm going to run in this direction. So I'm going to cut across the ribs like that, and then on the rest of the box I'm going to do the same. So the ribs are going to be running like this, so I can easily just slice with the coroplast cutter down the ribs for each one of the wall sections. So it's just going to be a nice trim down there. So I'm going to cut this to the right width, and then I'll be able to just cut multiple pieces to go all the way around this in a real easy manner. The core for this model is going to be 7 inches thick. So the core is going to fit perfectly between these two pieces, like that. So the coroplast is roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. So I'm going to go 7 inches plus 1/4. So, we're going to have an 1/8 inch overlap on each side. I'm going to put it together like this, not like that. When you go to assemble sides like this and you're going to glue it, you look at the coroplast, notice there's like a large groove running along the top here. Well, what I do is I just quickly fill this with glue along here to give a nice platform for the pieces to bond on the outside like this. Because we're not butting them up together this way, we're laying it on the top. So I want to kind of fill that. So I'm going to take the glue gun and just run a quick bead down here and do it kind of fast so that the glue starts cooling quickly as I do this. And I give it a couple seconds, let that cool off. Then I shoot a little bit more in. This gives a little bit of a base for my next piece to sit on as I go to do this. So I'm going to squirt a little bead along the edge of that and then press it right on top of this one. Then with coroplast, you have to hold this a little bit till the glue cools. And I don't mind it sticking to the table because you can just pop it off afterwards. But the coroplast retains a little bit of the heat of this glue as you do things like this. So you have to wait a little bit longer than you would if you were just sticking paper or wood together or something like that. So you just kind of twist it to free it, and you look, and that's a pretty nice job. Now, I also add a bead on the inside to give this a little bit of structural strength. The nice thing about having a nozzle like this, when you put it in the corner, you turn the gun a little bit and put a wider bead. make sure you set it back down for a second, let this glue cool. And everything still looks like it's aligned straight. I mean, you could put like a stack of books or something back here to make sure, you know, your pieces don't get misaligned. So you'll notice I added a bead in here to fill this rib, and there's a little bit of warping along here. I don't know if you can see that. You should be able to. Kind of like a little rippling. You want to go as quick as you can. It'll ripple a little bit, and then as the glue cools a little bit, it will straighten out slightly. You don't want to put so much glue that you totally warp or melt your coroplast too much. Okay, so I've just gone around section by section, putting these pieces on here. You know, trimming with the ribs. And what happens is when you use the coroplast cutting tool, it cuts the ribs in half, like that. So you want to make sure that you fill the edge with a little bit of glue, and when you put them together, just want to make sure they go together in a pretty nice fashion right there. And you're going to have a little bit of a gap, but it's not going to be a big deal. Like you can see over here, these all fit together pretty nice. And then on the inside, I've smoothly hot glued every seam, as you can tell right there. So, because this thing needs to be airtight. So, last one here, just going to trim this edge off right here. And like I said, when you're doing this, you're going to go to the middle of each rib is where you're going to mark. So you want to make sure these all go to the right location here. So like see on this final cut right here, I'm going to cut through right here. I'm just going to cut right through that last rib, splitting that in half with the tool. And always test fit your pieces. And we're looking perfect there. And one final 18-inch side to go. And like I said, occasionally, depending on how you trim it, you're going to get a gap down here. So since you've already filled the ribs on both sides, all you got to do is add a little bit more. And what I do is I usually hit the corners like this and use the gun to pack a little bit of glue down into the end. Let that dry, let it cool down. Put a little more on the other side like this. And I find that helps to lock the corners a little bit more. Now, once that cools down a little bit, you'll be able to fill this. And sometimes it's good to hold it in a different position till the glue settles down into its lowest point. Then it'll turn solid down there. Now when you put this together, you'll notice I overshot a little bit down here. Usually that doesn't matter. You can trim that back a little bit, or like I said, you can even take a sanding block and hit that a little bit. Sometimes you just have to wait until you put the whole thing together, and you'll see that you can just squirt a little bit of glue and you can press your sides in just a tiny bit to take up any slack like that. Because cutting coroplast is not really precision. I almost forgot, before I close this thing up, I slid this in here because I need to mark the core position in here on the back piece. I should have probably done this in the beginning, but whatever, that's fine. There's a little bit of a gap around here, but it's really not that bad. The core position is not super critical, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this as a template to trace where the core is going to sit, because that's going to kind of govern where all the dividers fit in once this box is put together. there it is. That's where the core is going to fit. Now, finish one side and glue this piece in. To do a box this size, about 18 by 14, I used a full stick of glue. And these are 1/2 inch by 10 inch glue sticks. So there's a little bit left in this gun right now, so I'm going to stick another one in. But that's to do this entire box. All the seams and every wall. Okay, looks good. So now it's time to put this side in here. And this is going to be a little bit tricky to do. I'm going to have to reach in through here and kind of glue it on the inside all the way around. So, smaller the glue gun the better sometimes. This one's pretty good because it's kind of on the small side. You may be able to get these sticks in the tiny size and use an even smaller glue gun. I have one of those too, but I didn't bring it out today. This one should reach in here just fine. So, do your best and finish up this last panel. Next up, we're going to make the core and the dividers and put them in the box, then put it all together. Now, to make the core, what we're going to do is we've got the remnants of our 3x6 sheet of coroplast. We're going to come in 6 inches and cut across the ribs like this. Then we're going to use our tool to break these strips into individual 6-inch squares. So you're going to get 6 of them per strip on here. And we're just going to keep going, and eventually at the end we'll know how many this thing is going to take. Because it could be slightly variable by, I think, like 1 strip or something like that to get it the right size. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so here we go. Going to dice this up. Now when you get a strip cut, come in 6 inches and mark in between the ribs, because you're going to use the Coro knife or a regular cutter to slice this up. And 6 inches happens to lie right between the ribs. Now, once you cut a 6-inch piece, come in here and line up, cut each one identical. Go to the exact same number of ribs, mark, and cut that so that they all come out very consistent. So all the edges look like this, very lined up and consistent. So when you're done cutting one strip off of there and dice it up into pieces, you should have something that looks like that. A nice stack of 6 core pieces. Now, when we go to glue these together, we're going to glue them in stacks of 6 like this. So we're going to have these sub-assemblies of a little sandwich type thing like this, and we're going to then glue those to each other to make a large cube. Also, all the core pieces, which I'll remind you again, they're going to be rotated like this. Every other one is going to be rotated. So you're going to have some channels going this way and half the channels going this way. So you can get your airflows crossing in there. For doing a 7-inch core, we measure this and it's just under an inch in thickness for 6 of these. So you're going to wind up needing 7 rows basically, and you may have to add 1 to take up the slack in the box, which we'll find out when we get to that point. So between building this part of the box and cutting the entire core with I believe the 1 extra sheet this is going to wind up needing, that's 1 sheet of coroplast. So we're going to have to crack into the second one to finish the air paths in here. There's only 4 pieces in here. There's an upper air path divider and a lower air path divider going here. And then there's 2 small support dividers inside that. And that's all we have left on this for the inside. And now, got all these cut out, just take one of your original stack here and use it as the template as to which ribs to cut, and dice these up. Now when cutting these, you will get a little bit of difference between these sheets, between these pieces sometimes, because if you notice, the ribs are kind of crushed on this. Some are nice and straight, some are crushed, so just be careful and make sure you line up, you know, rib to rib, and do the cutting at the right point. Okay, now after cutting 7 strips, we're up to this point right here, and you're going to need 3 extra to build that up properly. Because when this part is on, you want to come right up flush to it like that. So 7 times 6 plus 3 to do this box. Okay, now it's time to put the core together. What we're going to do is we're going to break this down into subsections of 6 sheets of coroplast. We're going to do 7 stacks of them and then glue them all together into one larger stack. That's the easiest way to do this. So each sheet of the core is alternated. So you start with, it doesn't really matter what you start with actually, because they're just all going to be turned 90 degrees. So you've got your first one here, and then the one that gets glued on top of it gets turned this way. So the flutes are facing this way. You can have flutes that way, all alternating all the way through the stack. So just make sure before you glue them that you've got the right one turned in the right direction. Now, to do this, what I do is I quickly go around all 4 sides, then stick this on top. And then you press for just a little bit. It's a little tough to do with gloves on, but today's a little chilly out here, so. And you may get some glue squirting out on the corners and stuff. Don't worry about that at all. So just make sure the sheets are aligned nicely like that. You know, they just fit tight against, you know, something like this. You know, clamp a piece of wood to your table. So you've got something to put them up against. And by the time you're done with this, you're going to have some that stick out a little bit, because there's always a little bit of variation in how the coroplast gets cut. That's not a problem, because we're going to hit this with a sander, just very lightly along there, or you could use a knife or something like that, and just trim a little bit along there. You know, just be careful. Okay, so you've got them all together, and there's 6 alternating pieces of coroplast. Set that aside, grab a couple more from the stack. It's a little tedious, but whatever. Okay, second stack is done. Now I'm going to put this one onto this one. And an X for good luck. There we go. And press really hard on the stacks here. And this Glue cools in about 20 seconds, so usually grabs pretty well right off the bat. And if you want to, every once in a while, turn, to make sure you're lined up on all the edges. Or you could use a taller piece of wood here, make it a little quicker. So, there we are. Fantastic. So, just continue on until the whole thing is done. Okay, so the entire stack is done, all glued together, and the side will eventually be glued on like this. It's going to leave the core one layer of coroplast short from the side here. There's going to be a side door that's going to fit down in here and seat up against the coroplast. There's going to be an outer trim ring that overlaps this a little bit, and that's where it's going to be attached to the outer wall of this. So it's going to be a two-piece door with a little bit of thickness that's going to pretty much just snap in there like that, making a nice seal on the side. And of course, this all has to be trimmed a little bit and sanded a little on the edges so everything fits nicely and comes in and out easily. And the next step is I'm going to take this finished core, which you can see right here, make sure we get a nice shot of this in the sun, and I'm going to make sure the edges are nice and even. I'm going to pick off any excess glue on here, then I'm just going to hit the sides lightly with a sander, like anywhere there's a high spot or something like that. Just going to take it down a little bit. You could do this by hand. You could just use a sanding block and just go lightly on this, go with the ribs, and after you're done sanding, just go in here and make sure all your ribs are kind of clear on this thing, so there's no areas that are plugged or whatnot. It'll still flow just fine. I mean, when you look at this stack end on like this, I mean, the air is just going to like flow right through this in every direction. It doesn't really slow down the velocity very much or affect the pressure inside this box very much. So sanding is the next step. So I'm going to use a orbital palm sander like this. Just get some 100 grit or whatever, 200 grit, whatever you want to do, and just use it to square up the sides. And a good tip for using an orbital like this, start in the center. So when you put the sander in the center, it has time to stabilize itself nice and level like this, and then you move from there and just hit the outsides really easily. Okay, sanding's done, and this looks real good. It's got some nice, pretty straight edges. If a couple of them are in a little too far, it's not a big worry really, because the dividers that are going in here are going to overlap on the sides. So in other words, the outer few ribs or cells through the ribs are going to be covered up by the divider itself. So all the air is going to tend to channel through the nice center that's already lined up. All you want to do is you want to get a nice fit so you can put it into your box and pull it out easily. It just has to be close enough. If you were building a normal HRV that was just a rectangular box with the 4 air inlets coming in the ends like this, you would have 2 shelves coming in the center. I mean, I call them shelves with the supports, and there'd be 2 supports top and bottom. Your core would wind up fitting down in here in between those 4 supports, and those 4 edges of this cube are the only thing you really have to worry about. You want to get a pretty good seal on that. For a normal home HRV, like if you're using this to like vent out your bathroom or something like that, and you're trying to retain the heat that way, a typical home HRV with the inputs on both sides, it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of air leakage between them. It's not really critical. This one I'm going to use for solder fumes and stuff like that. So I don't want the bad outgoing air to get past the corners and come into my incoming air. So when I slide this core into here, I'm probably going to use a little bit of silicone caulk around the support pieces that are going to frame this. So there's just going to be a light little squirt of silicone, and I'll pop it in there. And then I do a little bit more testing just to make sure that everything's perfect and it's not really going to have a lot of leaks. There really isn't much leakage at all when you do something like this. The last one that I built, even how shoddy it was, the only thing I had trouble with was getting the side to seal on there. So this is why I'm going to build this in as like a permanent side on this thing. In here, the next step is we're going to get the core centered where it needs to be and put some tape on the bottom to hold it into its perfect position down below here. Then we're going to work on the dividers that channel the airflow on the inside of the box. They're going to be popped in here and assembled. There's going to be 2 large ones that go through here that have a slight bend to them in 2 spots, and then there's just going to be 2 smaller ones that are kind of attached in there. So it's going to save on coroplast, and all the pieces in here are going to be pretty monolithic. So you don't have to worry about, all these added little chopped up tedious pieces inside here. So that's the next step. One of the worst parts of this job is trimming the hatch to make it fit the core like that, so you get it in there nicely. I've got this snapped down tight around the core. Have a little bit more sanding to do on this thing to get it to fit, because it's pretty tight, and it'll be kind of troublesome when the uneven sides kind of hit this a little bit. So make sure you have a slight gap around this, and that's going to take a little bit of work. I mean, if you're building this out of wood or something, it might be a little easier. Coroplast is a real tough material to work with, especially when you're cutting like across the ribs diagonally like this. It's real troublesome to get a nice clean edge on this. And I don't have a rotary cutter here with me right now, so I'm just trying to wing it by hand. So, lots of fun. So, keep at it. Almost ready to put the dividers in. Okay, now, to make the 2 dividers, upper and lower, that go in here, which are going to create the main, well, they're actually going to create all the air paths. What you're going to need is the 7-inch piece, and needs to be approximately 14 5/16. Now, the trick to doing this is you're going to make 2 slits halfway through to allow this to bend, except one is going to bend this way, and the other one you push in with your fingernail like so and make it snap the other direction. So you're going to get something that looks like that. And that is the gist of what we're doing here. Straight from here and straight from here to the corner, or as straight as you can get it. Then on this side, we're going to cut out a square directly in the middle of this. So there's going to be a small surrounding area here, and all the air is going to travel through the middle. We're going to make 2 identical ones, one top, one bottom. Then we're going to make another square here with the center trimmed out. It's going to slide down right in here and be glued in. So that's going to make the connecting supports to these 2 main ones. And the reason I do that is I want to have 4 separate walls, so to speak, holding this core in, so you can pull the core in and out without disturbing the walls or messing them up too much or getting a gap down in here you don't want. So it's just going to make a sleeve, in other words, for this to fit down into there. And these are all going to be glued to the top. So it's going to make one nice solid assembly. So after building both dividers and folding them the proper way along those 2 cuts, this is what we're going to have. And this creates all the air paths we need. So next thing, we're going to cut squares out of these and insert the other 2 supports in here. And then just make sure everything's really, really tight and all glued up. I just temporarily put a couple dots of glue on this to hold these in, just to show how the baffle is. Take the center section and come in about a 1/2 inch on all sides. And there you have it, all cut out. And ready to be placed in. To install this, you're just going to line up the flaps to the nearest straight rib. Just pay attention to that. And tack it in. Then we're going to remove the cube out of here. I had tacked the cube down with a couple dots of hot glue. So we're going to break that seal and pop this out of here once the first one is established in the case. So now glue that piece in there, get it nice and tight, and we're ready to pull the core out now so we can finish gluing the other side of this and get ready to add our other pieces. And don't be cheap on the glue. Put lots of it in here because you want plenty of glue on the seams to make sure it's airtight. Now, after both of these dividers are in, these baffles, you'll notice, the coroplast is a little floppy. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack this really quickly here to both sides of the cube so it stays nice and tight, because we're going to cut another support that's going to slide down into here. So we want to make sure that these sides get pinched together and glued on here perfectly, so we get as close to the cube as we can, and there's not a lot of gaps along these areas. And here are the side baffles. I came in 3/8 from all the edges. These are going to fit in there just like that and be glued in. 3 sides for right now. So make 2 of those. So cut these out and glue these little frames in. Okay, so after you struggle and swear and get glue all over the place, putting in these little connector pieces in here, these little connector baffles, what you want to do is take a little thin knife or something like that, come in here, and if you use the glue and put little dots in here like I did to hold the core in, you just want to cut that off and then carefully lift the core out. The core should come out kind of easily. You slide it up a little bit, then just very carefully lift it out of here. And there you have it. You should have that type of assembly inside here. Now, the next step after this is to make sure all your coroplast is level. Like one of mine here is just sunk down just a little bit, so what I'll do is I'll actually build this up with a little bit of hot glue along here. So you just carefully put down a thin layer, let it dry, or blow a little fan on it, put another little piece, build it up just a little bit so that you've got a nice surface on here. And once you have a decent surface, all this is level, everything's all trimmed and stuff like that, you're going to put your side cover on and make sure it's all lined up really good. Use electrical tape on coroplast because you can peel it off easily. Stick your lid on and then do any final trimming that you need to do. When you go to glue this on, you're going to start from the center and go out. So what I mean by that is you're going to quickly take hot glue and squirt it on these ribs in the center. Then fit your lid down and press it like this. So you're going to get it to lock in and seal really well. You want nice seals on all these internal walls in here. So then, at your leisure, you can just come around here, you can pry up the sides a little bit, and you can run around and do your seams really easily. But the critical part is the area on the walls in here. There is another option. If you want to, you can silicone this on. If you go to Home Depot in the US and go into the section that has the Lexan and the plexiglass, they have tubes of real 100% GE silicone sealant there. And it's not the cheap one that comes in the bath section of Home Depot or other hardware stores. It's actual real GE silicone. It's a really substantial type of silicone. So what you could do is you could wind up siliconing all this inside here. You could build up quite a bit of it and stick this on, and that would ensure that you have a really good seal, and you don't have to worry about, you know, pressing it real quick, or, you know, maybe half the glue is going to dry and cool off by the time you get to the other half to, you know, actually seat this thing and press it. If you use silicone, it'll give you a little bit of time to manipulate this, put it on, and then you could set like a couple books here or something like that, put some weight on it, and it'll wind up sealing the sides. So that's probably what I'm going to wind up doing, and then I'm going to use hot glue all along the edge by just bending it up and inserting glue all along there. So that's going to be the best way of getting this thing on here. Then when you're ready, you're probably going to need to do a little bit of final trimming around the hole to make it so the core can slide in and out easily into this. You're also going to have to custom fit the hatch that goes on the side. So there's going to be a little bit of trimming and maybe a little bit of sanding when it comes to that. So we're going to do those steps next. I'm going to apply silicone to this thing, put it all together, and do some gluing, and there you have it. The other step I'm also going to do, I'm going to use a printed out template to cut some small plexiglass windows, and they're going to be siliconed to the back of this and hot glued around the edge of that. So that's going to be another operation. So I'm going to have 4 clear windows in this. So I'm going to do those steps next. Okay, here's the window cutting step. I made some nice, pretty accurate templates here, and got my 2 different styles of window that's in here. Not all 4 are the same. They're sized differently to all fit on here. And there you have it. So get yourself a piece of plexiglass and get some of these if you don't want to struggle. Some Bosch T102 BF plexiglass blades. So Home Depot, Amazon, all these kind of places in the US carry these. So it'll make your job a lot easier. Then after you trace them, cut them out, get your 100 grit sanding block, hit your edges, and we're just about ready to install them. Make sure the overlap on your windows, if you have windows in this thing, is not enough to run into some of the inner supports. Everything's got to be clear. And now it's time to peel the protective plastic off these, and I'm just going to hot glue them in there. Okay, it's looking good now. Got the windows in. The hatch is trimmed properly on the side, so I can get a good seal around here, and you know, I can get the core in and out easily. And here's that silicone sealant I was talking about. They have small tubes of this. One of these has lasted for 2 HRV jobs. So this is the stuff they sell at Home Depot in the US, right in the section with the plexiglass and the Lexan. And see, it says for plastic sheets and other plastics. It's kind of like more solid silicone, and they sell it in this screw top container. This screw top container here never goes bad. So I don't know if it's something in the silicone, like an additive or whatever, but it never hardens up and you know, basically doesn't screw up. So this is the perfect thing to use. What we're going to do with the silicone is going to apply it all along the inner supports, you know, basically on all 4 pieces around here, taking the core out first, of course. Then the top of the box gets set down, and after the silicone dries, you know, I'm going to tape it shut to hold this on here. After the silicone dries inside here, then I'm going to go lift the corners and run hot glue all the way around the outside. So, I mean, if you don't have hot glue or something like that, you could probably build this whole box with silicone if you wanted to wait for it to dry. Might even be a little less messy. So, you know, give that a shot. This also comes in large caulk tubes sold in the same section there. So, you know, you could actually use this to do the whole thing. So, going to get to caulking. Okay, that's done. Time to snap the top on. Line this up really well. Press down on it. Get that silicone spreading underneath there, and then put some weight on it. And come back later and see how good of a job it is. Okay, this is coming along good. Edges of the box are all sealed now, and the silicone's drying inside the middle section, so I'm going to have to let that sit overnight. And now this over here, you may be wondering, when you drop the core in here, how are you going to get it out? So what you want to do is take either string, or in this case I used 20 gauge wire, some solid core that I just picked up at Radio Shack. I'm going to solder these wires together, move a piece of heat shrink up here, very carefully heat shrink that area so it's got a nice cover on it. Then I'm just going to center these and fold them down pretty well, fold them towards the center or whatever, anything that gets them as flat as possible, and kind of pre-dent the corners here so the core will fit down in there. There's just enough room around there for these wires to clear, so should be pretty nice. So that way you've got two wires to drop the core in, pull it out, and chances are this won't rip the core plast or anything like that. Okay, got these all soldered. I'm going to slide my heat shrink onto here, and I left a little bit of room. I just have to carefully heat shrink these without melting the coroplast. I got this little heat shrink gun on Amazon. This was a really nice buy right here. It's about $30. It's got a little stand that folds out. You can fold it up on the front. This whole cone on the front doesn't get really all that hot. I mean, it does, but it cools down really quickly. This plastic is some kind of heat resistant stuff. It's got a nice grill in there. It's 2 speeds. On low, it's supposedly 485 degrees, and it should easily do any kind of normal heat shrink for electronics like this without big overkill like using a big massive heat gun. And even on high, this thing only uses 350 watts, so you can use it pretty much anywhere. So I'm just going to kick it on low and do the deal. So fantastic, I was able to get in there without melting the coroplast. And then you just bend your wires or strings inward like this so they stay nice and flat under tension. When you need to use them, pull them up, lift straight out. So I'm going to place this in here now. And now you want to cut a door for the side. Because the wires stick up a little bit, you know, if you notice in here, you still have one layer of coroplast higher than the core. And it's still got a pretty nice seal in there because there's all that excess glue and whatnot in there. So make a door with a decent overlap. You know, about a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, something like that. And then this door is going to wind up being, you could either silicone it to the side, you could use double stick tape on the back of this, many different ways to seal this thing. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to use silicone on the back of this, stick this on, and use a little bit of hot glue, like just some dots in the corners to give it a little bit of physical strength while it's drying. And it's looking really good here, so it's time to start cutting the holes for the fans. Going to have one up here, one in here. This is going to be the outgoing path. The air is just going to come through there, go straight out, nice straight shot. And then the incoming air is going to come in down here, turn, and come through here. last time I built this, it seemed like the incoming fan, even with the turns, was really, really powerful. I mean, there was a lot of air moving through this. So it doesn't matter that you have these large corners in here and these large paths for the air to go on. That actually gives the outside air a little more hang time inside the box to get a little bit warmer before it comes out, because that's the point of this whole thing. We want to, get as much heat out of the outgoing air as possible and make sure that the incoming air is of, the right temperature. This fan on the incoming air is going to be facing upwards, so it's not blowing straight into your face. Now, this HRV, if you want to build one that's horizontal like this to fit in a horizontal window, you can do that. You could just make the box completely rectangular. It's totally up to you. I thought I'd add a little bit of style to this thing. A little bit of space station chic to this whole setup, so that's what I'm doing. So let's cut some holes. Alright, it's been a couple hours later. Had a little slight setback here with my cables to pull the core out of this thing. It ripped a little bit here because it was just a little too tight in the corners, and I went to pull, and of course, I tore this, and it popped some of my silicone here, so I just had to hot glue that area and get it all finished up. So now one of the tricks is you should take a sanding block and just hit the corners a little bit on the diagonal like this. Just round them just slightly, because when you do, of course, you'll get it to fit a lot smoother. See, this is the kind of thing you want. You want to be able to drop it right in there and just have it glide right out like that. So there we are. On to the next steps. I'm going to temporarily tack down my side door. I rounded the corners on this, made it look nice, and now I'm just going to hit it with just a couple dots of glue around the edge so I can get the fans in and get the airflow tested. Okay, I've got my fan here. It's a Nidec Servo Gentle Typhoon, 3000 RPM, and this is one of the heavy-duty series or high-speed series, whatever they call it. They had two other faster ones, but they're discontinued now, so if you go to Amazon, you can get the links to getting the 3000 RPM model. This one pushes a lot of air and is really quiet. It's also very power efficient. It only uses 0.22 amps while running. So these are about half the power of the other ones that I had in here. Now, I got a really poor template off the internet. It's kind of surprising nobody has actual correct templates out there for these fans to cut out this area. So I rescaled this one in SketchUp, and it got me really, really close. There's a little bit of a gap down here, but this will work just fine. So I'm going to apply that to here and do some tracing. Okay, looks good. Gonna cut that out, and once you get that trimmed out, you've got a template to do the next one, right down below. Next step is to get the fans mounted. This one's going to be blowing in, this one's going to be blowing out on the top. And all you need is some long screws of the correct length to go through here, and you can use anything, sheet metal screws, anything with a large enough head to give it some good support. And screwing into the coroplast is not a problem as long as you just get it in there once. What you may also want to do is, if you get a fan gasket, or you could even make a fan gasket out of, like, say, cereal box cardboard, put a little thin gasket layer behind this when you screw it on, or just use a little tiny bit of silicone around this to make sure you've got a good seal and the fans, blowing into this case in an optimal way. And I decided to just put a little bit of hot glue right there, just the tiniest amount on all four sides, just to stick this on there. Now, you can put screws in. You could put a little tiny bit of hot glue there. If you ever need to take the fan off, you could just, slice it with a X-Acto knife or cutter or something like that. Also, there's going to be a square shroud that's going to fit over the intake fan with a cup on the end, so we can attach it to some plastic dryer vent hose. in a detachable manner, because I'm going to be moving this in and out of a window. So this fan will be pretty much covered up. It's not going to be able to fall anywhere. This one here can be just left exposed. It really doesn't matter. If you want to put a shroud over it and duct it somewhere else, you could do that too. So you just don't want to run ducts that are too long with these fans, because you know, we're just running off 12 volt here, and there's a limited amount of air that these things can push, even though these are really good high static pressure fans. If you're going to use this in a house or something like that, you may have to go with quite a bit larger fans if you're going to run this into massive ducting and stuff like that. But we're not, so okay, once you get your holes on the front, there's one more small step you should do. Inside the outgoing air channel, you should come in here and put some caulk around the edges of this, all the way, to make sure you don't have any excess gaps in there. This way, when you have bad air going out, it's going to pass through here and come straight out of here without much restriction. If there's a little bit of caulk along there on both sides of the core, just a small amount, because you want to be able to trim it when you take the core out to make it pop out easier, this will ensure that the majority of the air just leaves like that. Now, I wouldn't you know, say to use one of these things for any really nasty, toxic fume removal purposes. I mean, that you would rather run it straight outside. But you know, solder fumes and stuff like that, if it's caulked inside here, you're not going to get anything into there. If you're just using an HRV for you know, like heat recovery purposes on regular household air, you don't have to worry about that at all, because just a little bit of air escaping past some gaps is not going to do anything at all to you. So it's going to be plenty safe. Now, on the back side, you want to put your two exit holes on here, nice and centered in these compartment areas. And they should fit whatever you're going to put on the outside. In this case, I'm cutting 4-inch holes to be used with some of these little rain hoods here, some vent hoods. My outer piece is just going to be a piece of wood, so I went ahead and drew my circles on here, got them all nice and centered, cut them out, took this, set it on here, traced inside, and now I'm cutting those out as one of my final steps here. So my pipe that comes off this vent should be able to easily go right through perfectly. And because this unit's a little bit big for my window, I'm going to put small standoff blocks, like top and bottom basically, to keep it off of that so it clears the trim around my window. But if you're using this in a different way, like attaching ducts onto here, or you've got this horizontal and attached right into a window, you should have no problems. Okay, cut my holes on the back, and I attached my window adapter here. Yours is going to look different, obviously. Or you might not even use a window adapter, and you might just use ducts coming out of this to go somewhere. So I've put in my two metal ducts in here. The bottom one is real close here. That's the incoming air, which is going to go into here, travel up, and come out the top. And that's held close to the side of the building, as you know, there'll be cooler air down there. The air leaving should, in theory, be a little bit hotter, so it may tend to kind of come upwards as it comes out of the exhaust here. And it's also a straighter path, so there might be a little more pressure or whatnot. And this makes sure that any solder fumes and everything will hopefully go away and not get blown down here and sucked in. So, looking pretty nice. So this is the final work. I'm going to go inside and wire up the fans and put two switches in here. One for each fan so I can individually control them. And I'm going to run this thing tonight. Okay, I've got the new HRV indoors here, attached in the window. And I went ahead and put the fans in this thing. Now, you could just wire both fans together and run them to a battery pack such as this. it's not a problem. What I did was I put separate on-off switches, one for each fan. So I can just turn on this one for exhaust only. I can turn on this one for fresh air only, or turn them both on for preheated fresh air coming out of here. And what I did, I use these yogurt cups to hold the dryer vent tubes because they happen to work really well for that. So this is hot glued right on here, and just the end of the cup is cut off, like about a quarter of an inch or something like that. Now, this is so you can adapt the hose right up to this and put it on nice and tight, and you can run a piece of electrical tape around if you want to make the seal really, really good. Now, coming in, I've angled this so that the air blows upwards a little bit so it doesn't blow into your face. I also made this hood. This hood fits perfectly on here. You can direct the air down. You can make it come towards you. So you can basically fit it any old way you want. And in this application, I'm going to put it on here so that all the air blows out this way, so it doesn't come near you while you're soldering. And then just put this on here. And fit a bunch of it on really good. Put the hose wherever you need it, and there you go. So now I come over here. Okay, got my power hooked up. Enable my power there, and now I've got the air going out. Got my air coming in. And these fans, these gentle typhoons here, they're fantastic, really. I mean, they're basically both of them, they're only 0.22 of an amp, so 2 fans are under half an amp, so they'll run off this pack for a few hours easily, and they're very quiet, so very nice. And so there's the setup. This fan at 3,000 RPM pulling out with its particular amount of vacuum here works out really well. So you can light a stick of incense and hold it right out here, like right at the beginning of the hood, and it's just enough to pull the air in there. I mean, if you really need to move some fumes out of here, you're going to have to get a slightly more powerful fan. They did have 4,000 RPM and 5,000 RPM versions of these, but then they get too noisy and too powerful. So actually, this is a really good compromise here, and it's just powerful enough to do the job in a hood like this that's just a little over a foot wide. So you can do all your soldering, or do your hot gluing in there or whatever, and just get the fumes out. So there it is. All in all, a very nice setup. So I'm going to be putting up the SketchUp file for this thing, and I'll put a link to it down below so that those of you that have SketchUp can actually basically have all the plans for this and cut it all out and put it together. So I hope you enjoyed the video here, and get in touch with me if you want to know more. Thanks.